I write this in the darkness between the walls, in a space that shouldn't exist, with fingers that no longer entirely feel like mine. The stylus trembles against the data slate I salvaged from Carrick's body, and I can hear them moving in the infrastructure around me, the servitors, the Arbites, the things that might once have been my crew. They're looking for me, of course. They've been looking for me since the collapse, since the moment I understood what we'd really been doing in the Underhive for the past 6 months. I don't expect to leave this crawl space. I don't expect anyone to find these words before the recyclers do their work. But I need to record it anyway. Need to make some kind of testimony before I become just another missing person in a city of trillions. Just another file marked, presumed deceased, in some sub-administratum office 300 levels above where I'll die. My name is Venko Harras. 37 years old, third-generation demolition specialist, licensed by the Departamento Munitorum for controlled structural clearance in civilian zones. I held an orange-grade work permit and a clean record with the labor guilds. I had a wife once, before the water plague took her. I had a daughter, before the child tides came. I had a life that meant something, or so I told myself during the long shifts, during the years of breathing recycled air and feeling the city settle on my shoulders like a tombstone. I was nobody special. I was exactly the kind of person the Imperium needs: loyal, competent, unremarkable enough to be trusted with the ugly work that keeps a Hive City functioning. 6 months ago, my crew received new orders. Not from our usual overseer, but from higher up, much higher up. An administratum adept came to our barracks block personally, accompanied by 2 arbitrators in full carapace armor. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Adepts don't visit the lower Gunran levels unless something has gone catastrophically wrong or catastrophically right, and arbitrators don't escort them unless there's expected resistance. But we were tired, and tired people don't ask questions. We were used to following orders. That's what they count on, isn't it? The sheer weight of exhaustion, the grinding routine of just getting through another day in a city where the air tastes like chemicals, and the walls weep condensation that'll burn your skin if you touch it bare-handed. The adept was young, which surprised me. Most administratum functionaries who make it to the level where they're issuing orders to labor crews are ancient, preserved by juvenile treatments and sheer spite. This one couldn't have been more than 30, with the kind of smooth, unlined face that spoke of life in the upper spires, where the air was clean and the light was real. He wore the red robes of his office, and when he spoke, his voice had that peculiar flatness that comes from spending too much time reading from data scrolls and not enough time talking to actual human beings. "Demolition Crew 779 Theta," he said, not looking at us, his eyes on his data slate. "You are hereby reassigned to Special Project Clearance in Underhive Sector Lazarine 9. Duration: indefinite. Compensation: standard plus 15% hazard pay. Compliance is mandatory. Transportation departs in 4 hours. Bring personal effects only. Questions will be addressed en route." Carrick, our crew chief, raised his hand. He was older than me by a decade, graying at the temples, with the kind of thick, scarred hands that came from 30 years of handling demo charges and industrial cutters. "Sir," the adept said, "what kind of clearance work?" "Lazarine's deep underhive. We don't usually work below level 200. The adept finally looked up, and I remember his eyes. They were brown, ordinary, but there was something in them that made my spine straighten. Not cruelty, exactly, more like absence. Like he was looking at us the way you'd look at tools in a box, calculating their usefulness. "Structural renovation," he said. "Clearing condemned infrastructure for reclamation. The details are classified above your clearance level. You will be briefed on site by your new supervisor." He paused, glancing at his slate again. "Your crew has a 93% safety record and no incidents of insubordination. This is why you were selected. Do not fail the Imperium." We didn't. Not at first. The transport down to Lazarine 9 took 6 hours, descending through layers of city that got progressively darker, colder, more ancient. We passed through zones I'd heard about but never seen the manufactory levels where they processed corpse starch. The water reclamation plants where the air was so humid your lungs felt like they were drowning. The pilgrim quarters where thousands of the faithful huddled in the darkness waiting for the Emperor's grace that would never come. The elevator shaft was ancient, pre-Imperial maybe, and it groaned with every meter we descended. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. By the time we reached our destination, I could see my breath, and my hands were shaking inside my work gloves. Lazarine 9 was different from any underhive sector I'd worked in before. Most of the deep levels were chaotic, organic in their disorder, centuries of hasty construction built on top of older construction, rooms connected by corridors that made no sense, communities clustered around functioning infrastructure like barnacles on a ship's hull. But Lazarine 9 was planned. You could see it in the architecture, in the way the corridors ran in perfect right angles, in the uniformity of the ceiling heights. This had been built intentionally, all at once, according to some design that predated the current administration. The walls were plastered with Imperial propaganda posters, but they were old, faded, showing styles of dress and forms of language that hadn't been used in decades. Loyalty is life, one read, next to an illustration of a family kneeling before an oversized aquila. Service to the Emperor is the highest form of existence. The images showed people with expressions of beatific joy, their faces upturned toward golden light that spilled from above. Someone had tried to tear the posters down at some point, but had only succeeded in leaving ragged strips of paper clinging to the walls like skin. Our new supervisor was waiting for us at the staging area, a broad, vaulted space that might once have been some kind of gathering hall. His name was Vex, and he wore the black uniform of an overseer from the Departamento Laborum, with steel-rimmed glasses and a data slate permanently clutched in one thin hand. He was thin everywhere, actually, like he'd been stretched on a rack, and his voice had a nasal quality that made every word sound like a complaint. "You're late," he said, though we'd arrived exactly when scheduled. "This is unacceptable. In Lazarine 9, we maintain Imperial standards of punctuality. The Emperor's work does not wait for stragglers." Carrick started to explain about the elevator, but Vex cut him off with a gesture. "Excuses are prayers to the gods of failure. You are here now. That must suffice." He consulted his data slate, his fingers dancing across its surface with practiced efficiency. "You will be clearing structures in subsector 7 through 12. The buildings are condemned, structurally unsound, and scheduled for reclamation. You will reduce them to rubble. The rubble will be processed for material recovery. The schedule is aggressive. You will work 12-hour shifts with 6 hours for rest and sustenance. There are quotas. They will be met." "What about the people?" This came from Mara, the youngest member of our crew, barely 22, with the kind of idealism that hadn't been beaten out of her yet by years of city life. "Are the buildings evacuated? What about relocating the inhabitants?" Vex looked at her like she'd asked whether the walls needed permission before being demolished. "The structures are condemned," he repeated slowly, as if speaking to a child. "No inhabitants. Any signatures your equipment detects are either vermin or residual biomatter. You are authorized to proceed regardless. Your concern is noted and unnecessary." That should have been my first warning. In all my years of demolition work, every job started with evacuation protocols, with arbitrators doing sweeps, with social workers processing displacement claims. But we were tired, and the hazard pay was real. And down in the underhive you learned not to ask too many questions about things that weren't your business. Our quarters were in a converted storage facility near the work zone. 6 bunks, a functioning lavatory, a heating unit that rattled but worked, and a small kitchen alcove with a protein processor. Luxury by underhive standards. There were 6 of us: Carrick, Mara, myself, a heavy weapons specialist named Gren, who could place charges with mathematical precision, a tech adept called Severin, who maintained our equipment and wore the red robes of Mars beneath his work suit, and a young man named Toller, who never said much, but could read structural weak points like some people read music. That first night, we ate our rations in silence, too exhausted from the descent to do much talking. The protein paste was standard gray, textureless, fortified with the necessary vitamins to keep us functional. It tasted like despair and processed algae. I'd been eating it for 30 years. I barely noticed anymore, but I noticed the sounds. Even through the thick walls of our quarters, I could hear Lazarine 9 at night. Not the sounds I was used to from underhive life, the crying of children, the arguments between neighbors, the distant clang of machinery, the prayers of the faithful. This was different. This was wind moving through empty spaces, metal settling, and underneath it all, something that might have been voices, or might have been the city's infrastructure groaning under its own weight. I lay in my bunk and listened, and I felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Anyone else hear that?" Toller asked from his bunk, his voice barely above a whisper. "Old buildings settle," Carrick said automatically. "We've all heard it before. Go to sleep. Tomorrow starts the real work." But I don't think any of us really slept that night. I kept drifting in and out of consciousness, aware of the others shifting in their bunks, aware of the sounds continuing outside, aware of something being wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It was like being in a room where all the furniture had been moved slightly to the left, everything looked right, but your body knew it wasn't. Morning came with a harsh klaxon that jerked me out of whatever approximation of sleep I'd managed. We dressed in our work suits, heavy canvas reinforced with plasteel plates, sealed against dust and debris, equipped with respirators and comm beads. Severin checked our equipment with his usual thoroughness. Demo charges, structural scanners, industrial cutters, safety harnesses, the portable generator that powered our heavier tools. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be. I wish I'd paid more attention to how normal everything seemed. I wish I'd understood that normalcy itself could be camouflage. The first building we were assigned to demolish stood in subsector 7, 3 blocks from our quarters. It was 12 stories tall, built in the same planned style as everything else in Lazarine 9, with regular windows and a facade that showed signs of former grandeur. Someone had carved aquillas above the entrance, but they'd been defaced at some point, scratched and gouged until the Imperial eagles looked more like wounded birds. The building leaned slightly to the left, and even from the outside, I could see cracks running up its sides like veins. "Standard collapse," Carrick said, pointing to the structural weak points Toller had identified. "We'll place charges on the load-bearing supports on floors 1, 3, and 7. Gren, you'll handle the primary placement. Venko, Mara, you're on backup charges and safety sweep. Toller, Severin, you'll monitor from the control station. Questions?" "Do we do an interior sweep first?" Mara asked. "Standard protocol is..." "Vex said the buildings are empty," Carrick interrupted. "We're on a tight schedule. We place the charges, we clear the blast zone, we bring it down. That's the job." So that's what we did. I followed Gren and Mara into the building, our helmet lamps cutting through the darkness inside. The entry hall was vast, 2 stories tall, with what had once been an ornate mosaic on the floor. It showed the Emperor in glory, surrounded by faithful citizens, their faces raised in adoration. But the tiles were cracked now, and moisture had gotten underneath them, and the whole image was fractured. The Emperor's face split down the middle, his followers scattered into broken fragments. The air inside tasted wrong even through my respirator. There was a smell underneath the standard decay and mold, something sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in standing water. The building was dark except for our lights, and our footsteps echoed in ways that made it sound like there were more of us than there actually were. "Ground floor," Gren said into the comm, moving to primary support columns. We found them easily enough, massive pillars of reinforced rockcrete, spaced at regular intervals, holding up the weight of 11 stories above us. Gren worked with his usual precision, placing the charges exactly where they needed to go, setting the timers, double-checking everything. I watched him work and tried not to think about the sweet rot smell. Tried not to notice the way the shadows seemed to move at the edge of my helmet lamp's beam. "Second floor," Mara said. "Venko, you're with me." We climbed the stairs together. They were wide, built for crowds, with railings of black iron that had begun to rust. More propaganda posters lined the stairwell walls. "Report heresy, save your neighbors." "The Emperor protects the loyal." "Idle hands serve the ruinous powers." The images showed arbitrators leading away criminals, showed families turning in their corrupted relatives, showed the righteous rewards of denunciation. Someone had scrawled something in the margins of one poster, but the text was too faded to read. The second floor was residential, dozens of small apartments, all identical, all with the same regulation dimensions and the same regulation furniture. Except the furniture was still there. That struck me as odd. When buildings were condemned and evacuated, people took their possessions. They stripped the places bare, took everything they could carry, left nothing behind. But these apartments were full. I could see through open doorways. Beds made up with thin blankets, tables set with plates and cups, clothes hanging in closets, children's toys scattered on floors. "Mara," I said quietly, "this doesn't look evacuated." Vex said. "I know what Vex said. But look at this. Does this look like people had time to leave?" She was quiet for a moment, her helmet lamp sweeping across a room where someone had pinned prayer scrolls to the walls. "Maybe they left in a hurry. Emergency evacuation. It happens. Without taking anything? Without even closing their doors? What are you suggesting, Venko?" I didn't know. That was the problem. I didn't know what I was suggesting, only that something felt profoundly wrong. But we had a job to do, and questioning orders wasn't something you did lightly in the Imperium. Not if you wanted to keep your work permit. Not if you wanted to avoid the attention of the wrong kind of authorities. We placed our charges and moved on. Third floor. More apartments. More evidence of lives interrupted. A child's drawing on a wall, crude but cheerful, showing a family holding hands beneath a sun. Except the sun had too many rays, and the rays looked like fingers, and the faces of the family members were too detailed, showing expressions of something that might have been joy or might have been terror. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that drawing, feeling something cold spread through my chest. "Venko," Mara's voice crackled in my comm. "You good?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just checking the structural integrity." We finished the third floor and were about to move to the seventh when I heard it. Not through my comm, but directly, through the walls and floor. A sound like breathing, like dozens of people breathing in unison, slow and deep. I froze, my hand halfway to the next charge placement, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" "The breathing." Silence on the comm. Then Carrick's voice. "Venko, report. What's your status?" I heard something, like people breathing. The building's settling. Old structures make all kinds of sounds. Focus on the job. But it hadn't sounded like a building settling. It had sounded like lungs filling and emptying, like a congregation at prayer, like something vast and organic existing inside the walls. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist we do a proper sweep, but I could hear the dismissal in Carrick's voice. I'd worked with him for 8 years. I knew when he'd made up his mind, so I placed my charges and tried not to listen to the breathing. Seventh floor. This was supposed to be the last placement, the final set of charges that would bring the whole structure down in a controlled collapse, sending it straight down into its own footprint where the rubble could be easily processed. Gren met us there, his work on the lower floors complete. Together we moved through corridors that seemed narrower than they should have been, our helmet lamps creating crazy shadows that moved when we moved, and sometimes when we didn't. The seventh floor wasn't residential. It was something else, long corridors with doors on both sides, the doors numbered in a style I didn't recognize, with symbols beneath the numbers that looked like old Imperial script but wrong somehow, the letters twisted in ways that made my eyes hurt to follow. Some of the doors were open. I looked through one and saw a room full of beds, Dozens of them, all occupied. Not by people. By shapes that might have been people once, wrapped in sheets, perfectly still. The sweet rot smell was stronger here, so strong my respirator barely filtered it. "Gren," I said slowly. "Are those?" "Dead," he said flatly. "Dead for a while. Don't look too close. It's not our problem." But I did look. I couldn't help it. The shapes under the sheets were wrong, too long in some places, too angular in others, like the bodies had been rearranged into configurations that biology shouldn't allow. And the sheets themselves weren't white anymore. They were stained with something dark that had spread from the bodies like ink in water, creating patterns that almost looked like text, like someone had tried to write messages using human remains as ink. "We need to report this," Mara said, and her voice was shaking now. This isn't right. These people weren't evacuated. They were left here. They died here." "We report it after the job," Gren said. "We're on a schedule. Vex will discipline us if we're late, and I don't want to know what discipline looks like in this sector." He placed his charges with shaking hands. I could see the sweat on his face through his helmet's faceplate. Mara and I backed him up, working on autopilot now, our training overriding the screaming instinct that told us to run, to get out of this building, to refuse this job, and face whatever consequences came. We finished. We descended. We cleared the blast zone. The whole crew gathered at the control station, a reinforced bunker 300 meters from the target building. Severin activated the detonator sequence. The charges had a 5-minute delay to ensure everyone was clear. "Carrick," I said as we waited, "we found bodies in there. Lots of them. This building wasn't evacuated properly. Something's wrong with this job." He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the building, on the structure we were about to destroy. "I know," he said quietly. "I found them too. Ground floor had a whole wing full of them. But what are we supposed to do, Venko? Refuse the job? Report to who? Vex? The adept who brought us here? The administratum that assigned us? We're demolition workers. We're nobody. We don't get to question this kind of thing. So, we just blow it up? With all those people inside? They're already dead. We're not killing anyone. We're just clearing rubble." The first charge detonated with a deep, concussive thump that I felt in my chest. Then the second. Then the third. The building shuddered, seemed to hang in space for a moment, and then collapsed inward with a roar like a dying god. Dust exploded outward, engulfing our bunker, turning the world into a grey chaos of debris and sound. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. When the dust began to settle, the building was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble, 12 meters high, already beginning to settle under its own weight. "Job complete," Carrick said into his comm. "Requesting next assignment." Vex's nasal voice came back immediately. "Logged. Return to quarters. New assignment tomorrow, 0600. Maintain efficiency." We walked back through the empty streets of Lazarine 9, not talking, not looking at each other. The dust from the collapse hung in the air, making the whole sector look like it was underwater, the lights from our helmets creating pale cones in the murk. I kept thinking about the bodies under the sheets, about the wrong angles they'd made, about the sweet rot smell that my respirator couldn't quite filter. I kept thinking about how Carrick had known, had found them too, and had decided that being nobody meant accepting whatever we were told to do. That night in our quarters, none of us could eat. We sat on our bunks and stared at the walls and listened to Lazarine 9 settling around us. The sounds were worse now, not just wind and metal, but something that sounded like words, like a vast congregation reciting prayers in a language I almost recognized. "We should report this," Mara said finally, "to the Arbites. To someone. This isn't right. Those people were already dead," Gren interrupted. "You heard Carrick. We didn't kill anyone. But someone did. Someone killed all those people, and left them there and then sent us to destroy the evidence." "Evidence of what?" "This was Severin. speaking for the first time. His augmetic eyes glowed red in the dim light of our quarters. "You assume malice. Perhaps it was plague. Perhaps it was a quarantine failure. Perhaps they died of natural causes over years, and the bodies were never processed. The Imperium is vast. Bureaucracy fails. Things slip through the cracks. All of them?" Mara's voice was rising. "All of them just happened to die and no one noticed? No one cared?" "Yes," Severin said simply. "That is exactly what happened. Because they were under Hive, because they were poor, because they were unimportant. This is not a revelation, Mara. This is simply how the Imperium functions." She was quiet after that. We all were. Because he was right, wasn't he? We'd all lived in the Hive long enough to know how it worked. Resources went up, waste went down, and people who couldn't work, couldn't contribute, couldn't maintain their utility, people became waste. It was the mathematics of survival in a city of trillions. It had to be that way, didn't it? I lay in my bunk and tried to convince myself of that. Tried to believe that what we'd destroyed was just a failure of bureaucracy, just another tragedy in a galaxy full of tragedies. But I kept seeing that child's drawing, the family holding hands beneath a sun with too many fingers. I kept hearing the breathing in the walls, and I kept thinking about how the dust from the collapse had tasted, even through my respirator, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in standing water. Over the next 3 weeks, we demolished 7 more buildings. Each one was the same. Each one was supposed to be evacuated. Each one was full of bodies in beds, bodies wrapped in sheets, bodies arranged in patterns that made no architectural sense. Each one smelled of sweet rot and something else underneath, something like incense, like the kind burned in temples, but wrong, acidic, making your eyes water. We stopped talking about it. That was the worst part, not that we were doing it, but that we'd normalized it. After the first few buildings, we stopped even mentioning the bodies. We placed our charges, we cleared the zones, we brought down the structures, we filed our reports. Demolition complete. No complications. It became routine. We became efficient at it. The Imperium values efficiency above all else, doesn't it? We were being good servants of the Emperor. We were maintaining our quotas. Mara tried to leave after the 4th building. She told Carrick she was sick, that she needed to return to the upper levels, that she couldn't do this anymore. Vex came to our quarters personally. He brought 2 arbitrators with him, not the same ones who'd escorted the adept, but bigger, with riot shields and shock moles, the kind who'd broken strikes and quelled food riots. "Illness must be verified by approved Medicaid personnel," Vex said, consulting his ever-present data slate. "I have no record of illness. I see only a worker failing to meet her contracted obligations. This is a serious matter. This suggests corruption of moral fiber. This suggests possible heretical influence." The word heretical hung in the air like a blade. We all knew what happened to people accused of heresy in the Underhive. We knew about the interrogations, the confessions extracted through pain, the public executions meant to remind everyone of the price of deviation. Mara went back to work. Her eyes looked hollow after that, like someone had scooped out everything that made her Mara and left just the shape of her behind. She placed her charges. She cleared her zones. She filed her reports. She stopped asking questions. It was after the 6th building that I found the journal. We were processing the rubble, searching for salvageable materials as per our contract, when my scanner detected something unusual in the debris, not metal or useful components, but organic matter that registered as preserved paper. I dug it out carefully. A small book bound in synthetic leather, water-stained but intact, its pages covered in careful handwriting. I shouldn't have read it. I knew that, even as I was opening it, even as I was using my helmet lamp to illuminate the pages. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened in these buildings, who these people had been before they became bodies wrapped in sheets. The journal belonged to someone named Tevin Lusk, a maintenance worker assigned to Lazarine 9 5 years before we arrived. The early entries were mundane complaints about the work schedule, notes about repairs needed in various sectors, observations about the other workers. But about 6 months into the journal, the tone changed. The prayers have started. One entry read, "Everyone in the sector has to attend. Mandatory. 3 times a day. The preacher says it's for our spiritual well-being, that the Emperor requires devotion from even the lowest servants. But the prayers are strange. The words aren't in any Gothic dialect I recognize. And the way everyone says them together, all at once, synchronized, it makes my teeth hurt. It makes something in my chest feel wrong." The entries continued, charting a slow descent into something I didn't have words for. The prayers became more frequent, more intense. People who missed them were taken away for spiritual counseling and came back different, quieter, their eyes distant, moving in ways that seemed just slightly off. The sector's population became more regimented, more synchronized, everyone moving and speaking and thinking in patterns that became increasingly uniform. "They've sealed the exits." A later entry read, the handwriting now shaky, less controlled. "Vex says it's for our protection, says there's heresy in the surrounding sectors, says we need to be quarantined for our own good. But no one's tried to leave. Everyone seems content to stay. Everyone except me. I'm going to hide this journal, going to try to get it out somehow. Someone needs to know what's happening here. Someone needs to know that Lazarine 9 isn't what it seems." The final entry was dated 3 months after the quarantine began. I can hear them in my thoughts now. The prayers have gotten inside my head. I find myself reciting them without meaning to. I find myself moving with the others, synchronized, part of the pattern. I don't want this. I don't want to become whatever they're becoming. But I can feel myself slipping, can feel my thoughts aligning with the collective. By the time anyone reads this, I'll probably be in one of those beds in the 7th floor wards, wrapped in sheets, my body rearranged into a configuration that serves the pattern. I'm sorry. I tried to resist. I tried to stay human. But the Emperor doesn't protect everyone, does he? Sometimes, he abandons us to the dark. I stood there in the rubble, the journal in my trembling hands, and finally understood. Not that it helped. Understanding never helps. It just makes you aware of your complicity, makes you conscious of the machinery you're part of. Lazarine 9 hadn't been evacuated. It had been quarantined, and we weren't demolishing empty buildings. We were destroying evidence of something the Administratum wanted erased, a whole sector that had somehow become corrupted, synchronized, transformed into something that threatened the rigid order the Imperium demanded. And rather than deal with whatever had happened here, rather than investigate or attempt to save anyone, they'd simply sealed the exits and waited for the population to die or transform, or cease to be a problem, and then they'd sent us to erase it. "What's that?" Gren's voice made me jump. He was standing behind me, his helmet lamp illuminating the journal in my hands. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just old records. Worthless." But he'd seen my expression. He'd seen the way my hands were shaking. "Venko," he said slowly, "whatever that is, you should probably put it down. You should probably forget you found it. Don't you want to know what happened here? Don't you want to know what we're really doing?" "No," he said flatly. "I don't. And neither should you. We're nobody, Venko. We're less than nobody. We're the people they send to clean up the messes they don't want to think about. Our job isn't to know. Our job is to do. And if what we're doing is wrong..." "Wrong?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think the Imperium cares about wrong? You think anyone up in the spires gives a single damn about what happens down here? We're already dead, Venko. All of us. We were dead the moment we descended to this level. The only question is whether we die having done our duty, or whether we die as heretics who ask too many questions." He took the journal from my hands, walked to the debris pile, and buried it deep under tons of rubble. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, looking suddenly much older than his 53 years. I wanted to argue with him, wanted to insist that we still had choices, that we could still refuse, that there had to be someone we could report this to who would care. But I looked around at Lazarine 9, at the empty streets and the dark windows and the propaganda posters peeling from the walls, and I knew he was right. We were already dead. We just hadn't stopped moving yet. The 8th building broke us. We were 2 months into the assignment by then, and the crew had achieved a rhythm of sorts, a grim efficiency born of repetition and the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness into something spiritual. We moved through our tasks like automatons, placing charges, clearing zones, bringing down structures, processing rubble. We spoke in monosyllables. We stopped meeting each other's eyes. We ate our rations without tasting them, and slept in shifts, haunted by dreams of breathing walls and bodies arranged in patterns that almost made sense. The 8th building stood in subsector 12, at the far edge of our assigned work zone. It was taller than the others, 15 stories and older, its architecture different from the planned uniformity of the rest of Lazarine 9. It had flying buttresses and gargoyles, the kind of Gothic excess that spoke of construction during an era when the Imperium had been wealthy enough to waste resources on aesthetic grandeur. The gargoyles looked like angels, except their faces were wrong, their expressions caught somewhere between ecstasy and agony, their stone mouths open in silent screams or prayers. "This one's different," Toller said as we approached, his voice crackling through the comm. "Structural readings are off. There's something. I don't know how to describe it. The building isn't settling. It's moving. Like it's breathing." "Buildings don't breathe," Carrick said automatically. "This one does." We stood outside the entrance, 7 of us, our full crew, because Vex had insisted that everyone participate in this job, that efficiency required total cooperation. The doors were sealed with old-style mechanicum locks, heavy adamantine that had rusted but held. Severin worked on them with his tools, his augmetic fingers moving with precision, and after 15 minutes the mechanisms gave way with a groan that sounded almost organic. The smell hit us immediately, even through our respirators. That same sweet rot scent, but concentrated, so thick it was almost visible, like the air inside had become syrup, and underneath it, that incense smell, stronger now, mixed with something else, something that smelled like ozone, like electricity, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Emperor, protect us," Mara whispered. The entry hall was vast, larger than any of the previous buildings, its ceiling lost in shadows above. The floor was covered in bodies, not wrapped in sheets this time, not arranged in beds, just lying there, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, covering every surface, piled 3 or 4 deep in some places. They were dressed in workers' clothes, the same standard-issue coveralls we wore, but their bodies were wrong. I want to say they were decomposed, but that's not accurate. They were transformed. Their limbs had lengthened and twisted, bones visible through translucent skin, joints bending in directions biology didn't allow. Their faces were frozen in expressions that might have been pain or rapture or something for which there was no human word. And their mouths were open, all of them, opened wider than mouths should open, their throats visible, something dark and wet, glistening inside. "Back out," Carrick said, his voice strangled. "Everyone back out, now." But the doors had closed behind us. I heard Severin trying the locks, heard him cursing in binary cant, heard the mechanisms refusing to respond. We were sealed inside. "Charges," Gren said. His voice was shaking but steady. "We can blow the doors from inside. It'll be dangerous, but..." The breathing started then. Not a sound. Exactly. More like a presence. A pressure. The feeling of vast lungs filling and emptying. The weight of breath from something too large to see. The bodies on the floor began to move, not standing up. Just shifting, settling, their transformed limbs adjusting. Their opened mouths, making sounds, not screams, not words, but something rhythmic, something that might have been singing if you listened to it wrong. We ran. No discussion, no planning, just pure animal panic sending us deeper into the building, away from the singing bodies, away from the sealed doors. Our helmet lamps cut through the darkness, creating crazy shadows, illuminating corridors lined with more bodies, rooms full of bodies, bodies stacked against walls, bodies hanging from ceiling fixtures, bodies that had merged together into larger configurations that looked like sculptures or machines or prayers made flesh. I lost track of the others. In the chaos and darkness, my crew scattered, our comms filled with static and screaming, and something underneath that might have been singing, that synchronized hymn-like sound coming from the bodies. I stumbled through corridors that twisted in ways that shouldn't fit inside the building's exterior dimensions, climbed stairs that led down even as I was ascending them, passed through rooms where the walls were covered in text, written in blood or something like blood, the same phrases repeated thousands of times. We are become pattern, we are become song, we are become the Emperor's true servants. We are become one. I found Mara on the 5th floor, huddled in a corner, her helmet removed, her face pale as death. She was holding her charge pack, her fingers on the detonator, and there was a terrible clarity in her eyes. "It's a temple," she said. "Don't you see, Venko? It was always a temple. They thought they were serving the Emperor, but they were serving something else. Something that got inside their heads through the prayers. Something that rearranged them into patterns it needed. And we've been destroying the evidence. We've been cleaning up the mess. We've been good little servants. Mara, we need to move. We need to find the others and there is no out." She was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "There's only becoming part of the pattern or dying before it takes us, and I choose dying." "No," I said, reaching for her. "No, Mara, don't." She triggered the charges. Not the full pack, just enough to blow herself apart, to ensure there wasn't enough left to transform, to rearrange, to become part of whatever pattern the building demanded. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, throwing me back, filling the air with smoke and debris and something wet that I knew was Mara but tried not to think about. I lay there for I don't know how long, my ears ringing, my body screaming, trying to understand why she'd done it, trying to understand why dying had seemed like the better option, and slowly, as my hearing returned, I began to understand, because I could hear the singing more clearly now, and I could feel it pulling at something inside my head, something deep in my thoughts, trying to synchronize my breathing with the vast rhythm of the building, trying to align my consciousness with the pattern. I ran again, down corridors that all looked the same, past bodies that were moving now, their transformed limbs pulling them across floors, their opened mouths releasing that synchronized singing. I found a stairwell and descended, hoping somehow to reach the ground floor, to escape through the sealed doors, to get out before the pattern took me. But the stairs didn't go down. No matter how many flights I descended, I kept ending up on higher floors, kept passing markers that said I was ascending when I knew I was going down. The building's geometry didn't make sense. Or rather, it made perfect sense according to rules that weren't Euclidean, according to principles that existed in dimensions I couldn't perceive. I found Carrick on what my helmet display said was the 13th floor, but which couldn't possibly be the 13th floor because I'd never gone higher than 5. He was sitting against a wall, his helmet off, his eyes distant, his lips moving in synchronization with the singing. He looked at me when I approached, but I don't think he saw me. I think he saw through me, past me, his consciousness already aligned with whatever pattern the building served. "Carrick," I said, shaking him. "Carrick, stay with me. We need to." "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Can't you see how beautiful it is? The pattern, the synchronization. No more doubt, no more questions, no more being nobody. We become part of something vast. We become necessary. We become loved. That's not love. That's not." "How would you know?" His eyes focused on me then, and there was something terrible in them, not malice, but pity. "You've spent your whole life being nobody, Venko, being expendable, being one more worker in a city of trillions, one more tool to be used and discarded, and now you're being offered something else. You're being offered meaning, purpose, unity, and you're refusing it because you're afraid, because you'd rather die alone than live as part of something greater." "You sound like propaganda," I said desperately. You sound like those posters on the walls. Maybe the propaganda was right. Maybe service to something greater than yourself is the highest form of existence. Maybe the Imperium understood that and just implemented it poorly. Maybe what's happening here is what they always wanted: perfect obedience, perfect synchronization, perfect unity of purpose. He stood up then, moving with a grace he'd never had before, his joints bending just slightly wrong, his breathing synchronized with the singing in the walls. He reached for me, and I saw that his fingers were longer than they should be, the bones visible beneath skin that had become translucent. And I ran until I found a room I could seal, a small storage closet on what might have been the 8th floor, or might have been somewhere else entirely. I barricaded the door with scrap metal and old furniture. I sat in the darkness, with my back against the wall and my data slate in my trembling hands, and I began to write this. I don't know how long I've been here. My chronometer has stopped working, or time itself has stopped working, or I've stopped being able to perceive time in any linear fashion. I can hear them moving outside the bodies, the singing things that used to be people, maybe used to be my crew. I can hear the pattern getting stronger, feel it pressing against my thoughts like water pressure against a failing seal. I understand now what we were really doing. The Imperium knew what had happened in Lazarine 9. They knew that something had gotten into this sector, something that offered unity and purpose and meaning in exchange for individuality and humanity. They knew that the people here had accepted that exchange willingly, had synchronized themselves into a pattern that made them something other than human. And the Imperium couldn't allow that, not because it was cruel or evil, but because it was competition. Because the pattern offered what the Imperium offered: surrender of self to a greater purpose, but did it more efficiently, more completely, more honestly. So they quarantined the sector. They let everyone die or transform or cease to be human. And then they sent us expendable nobodies, people whose disappearance wouldn't matter, to destroy the evidence, to erase this experiment in alternative purpose, to ensure that no one else would see what the pattern could offer and decide they preferred it to the Imperium's version of servitude. We were never meant to leave. That's why Vex was so casual about our exposure. That's why the hazard pay was so high. That's why they chose a crew with no families, no connections, nothing to tie us to the upper levels. We were sent here to die, either in the demolitions or by becoming part of the pattern ourselves. Either way, the evidence would be erased, and the Imperium could maintain its monopoly on meaning. I can feel it now, pressing against my thoughts. The pattern, the synchronization. It would be so easy to open the door, to stop fighting, to let my breathing align with the vast rhythm of the building. It would be so easy to become part of something larger than myself, to stop being Venko Harris, nobody, nothing, expendable, and become instead a note in a cosmic symphony. But I'm writing this instead. I'm making this testimony. I'm refusing the pattern, not because I think anyone will read this, not because I think it matters, but because refusing is the last human thing I can do, because being nobody matters, because being expendable matters, because the right to die as yourself, alone and afraid and fully conscious, is worth more than eternal life as part of something greater. The door is weakening. I can hear them on the other side, singing, beckoning, promising unity. I can feel my thoughts beginning to align despite my resistance. I'm running out of time, if anyone finds this, and I know no one will, because this entire sector is probably scheduled for Cyclonus firebombing once we're all dead or transformed. Understand this. The Imperium is vast and cruel, and it treats its citizens like components in a machine. But at least it lets you die as yourself. At least it lets you maintain the fiction of individuality even as it grinds you down into dust. The pattern is honest about what it offers: complete surrender, total unity, the absolute abnegation of self, and that honesty is somehow more terrifying than the Imperium's lies. I served the Emperor for 37 years. I paid my tithes. I followed my orders. I asked no questions. I was exactly the kind of citizen the Imperium needs: loyal, competent, invisible. And my reward is dying alone in the darkness, writing words no one will read, refusing a pattern that promises everything I've ever lacked. Maybe Carrick was right. Maybe I'm refusing it because I'm afraid, because I'd rather die alone than live as part of something greater. Or maybe I'm refusing it because I finally understand that being alone, being afraid, being nobody, these are the things that make us human. Take them away, even for good reasons, even to ease suffering, even to provide purpose, and what's left isn't human anymore. It's something else, something that sings in the dark. The door just gave way. I can see them now, silhouetted in my helmet lamp's beam shapes, that used to be people, bodies rearranged into configurations that almost make sense, mouths open wide and singing in perfect synchronization. They're reaching for me, they're beckoning. And part of me, a large part, a part that's been growing since I entered this building, wants to reach back. But I'm not going to. I'm going to sit here in the darkness, holding this data slate, finishing these words. I'm going to die as Venko Harris, demolition specialist, third-generation worker, husband to a woman taken by plague, father to a daughter taken by tithes. I'm going to die as nobody, as nothing, as one more expendable servant of an empire that never cared whether I existed. And in this place, where the pattern promises unity and purpose and meaning, where everything is synchronized and nothing is alone, my refusal matters. My death, my small, insignificant, utterly meaningless death matters. Because I chose it. Because I remained myself until the end. Because the Imperium taught me one true thing in all its lies, that service freely given, even in suffering, even in despair, means more than paradise purchased through surrender. They're touching me now. I can feel their fingers too long, too many joints on my arms, my legs, my face. I can feel the pattern pressing against my thoughts, trying to synchronize my breathing, trying to align my consciousness with the collective. It would be so easy to let go, so easy to stop fighting, but I'm not going to. I'm going to hold on to being nobody until there's nothing left to hold. I'm going to remain Venko Harris until the last possible moment. And when that moment comes, when my consciousness finally dissolves into the pattern, when I become just one more note in the vast synchronization, at least I'll know I resisted. At least I'll know I chose. At least I'll know I died human. The Emperor protects, they always said. But he doesn't, does he? He just watches us suffer and calls our suffering sacred. He just demands our service and calls our service duty. He just grinds us down into components and calls our grinding necessary. And in the end, when the pattern takes us, when we're transformed into something that serves a different purpose, when we become notes in a symphony, he never intended, we'll still be doing exactly what he taught us to do. We'll still be surrendering ourselves to something greater. We'll still be becoming less than human in service to meaning. The only difference is that now we'll be honest about it. Now we'll be singing instead of screaming. Now we'll be synchronized instead of scattered. Now we'll be pattern instead of people. And somewhere in the upper spires, in offices I'll never see, administered by people who'll never know my name, a report will be filed. Demolition Crew 779 Theta, presumed deceased. Sector Lazarine 9, reclamation complete. No complications. Another day in service to the Imperium. They're pulling me now, dragging me toward something I can't see, toward a chamber where other bodies wait in configurations that almost make sense, toward a purpose I never wanted, but am about to receive anyway. My helmet's cracked, my respirator's failing. I'm breathing the air of Lazarine 9 unfiltered now, breathing in the sweet rot smell, breathing in the incense, breathing in the pattern itself. And I can feel it inside me now, aligning my thoughts, synchronizing my consciousness, making me part of something vast and terrible and eternal. But in these last seconds, in these final moments of being Venko Harris, I want it recorded. I refused. I resisted. I remained myself as long as I could. And if that means nothing in the vast machinery of the Imperium, if my resistance changes nothing, saves no one, matters to no one, then at least I'll die knowing I tried. At least I'll die knowing I was human. even if only for a little while, even if only at the end, even if,